Here today we got Professor Lackenbauer from Waterloo University in Canada, Ontario, and he came here to talk us about the issues on the Arctic. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lackenbauer, for being here with us today. It was a fantastic presentation on your side, and I would like to ask you two main questions on this Arctic issue. First of all, there has been a lot of discussion about all these resources, energy resources, mineral resources, and so on and so forth. So what's your opinion, what's your view on the future for this exploitation of resources in the Arctic?
I'd say, well, it's very much tied in with accessibility to resources. So we've known for a long time that there are a lot of resources, a very diverse amount of different types of mineral resources, oil and gas deposits in the region. It's because of the melting of the ice cover and global warming more generally, that people are very excited about the prospect of being able to access these resources. At the end, I think my net assessment is there's been a lot of over-enthusiasm about the opportunities associated with the region. There certainly are resources, some of which will be exploited if global market conditions make them attractive. But there's still a lot of obstacles in the region to achieving the levels that some people are dreaming of. In terms of the mining sector, I think those mining resources very much belong to the Arctic states. They're very clear in terms of ownership. So a lot of the international attention to questions about ownership are really misplaced. Instead, it's whether or not supply and demand globally warrant going in and accessing resources where there's very limited infrastructure in the communities, where it's very expensive to extract the resources because there's not a lot of people to draw upon with local skills. And also the fact that there's a lot of risks involved in accessing Arctic resources that may take a long time to actually bring returns to shareholders. So we're going to see that a lot of this development, when it does take place, I think is going to be undertaken backed by some global interests, potentially countries like China and India, for example, who are willing to take long-term risky ventures into some of these areas. The area, the sector of resource development that's attracted the most international attention tends to be oil and gas. And while I think we'll continue to see oil and gas developed quite aggressively in the Russian Arctic offshore as their land-based resources dry up and their economy is very dependent upon oil and gas, and offshore in Norway, where there's a lot of expertise, I think in the North American Arctic, where there is currently no exploratory drilling or any production, I don't think that that's going to take off. So as much as the United States Geological Survey has talked about 22% of the world's undiscovered energy resources lying in the Arctic basin, I don't think that's going to translate in the next 2 decades into a huge amount of activity, particularly in the North American Arctic. So again, unless oil was to reach a very high amount per barrel, I think we're going to find that the costs of extracting Arctic resources, the cost of shipping from the North American Arctic, and a lot of the unpredictability associated with climate change just don't make it a very attractive environment for people to undertake large-scale exploitation.
Okay, directly linked with that, there is another myth on the Arctic thing, and it's is this scramble for resources that you say is not going to be that immediately happening, is this going to lead to conflict in the area? How do you see this, let's say, more geopolitical situation in the Arctic?
Great. Well, it's a great question. A lot of the attention has suggested that there is, as you said, this race for resources, that as the world is waking up to the opportunities in the Arctic and all of these resources becoming more accessible, that a lot of non-Arctic countries taking interest are going to be competing, or that the Arctic countries amongst themselves are going to actually be fighting for the resources. I don't think that this is going to occur. First of all, given the nature of a lot of the resources, they clearly belong to the different Arctic states. Certainly any of the resources lying on land, there's no question about who owns them. The only disputed little piece of territory is a little rock called Hans Island between Canada and Denmark, and I assure you, Canada is not going to go to war with the Danes over a rock where there are no resources whatsoever. When it comes to continental shelves, so coastal states have the right to resources lying on the seabed even beyond 200 miles off their shore if they can prove that it's part of their continental shelf. There's been a lot of concern about, given that there are no clear boundaries yet between the different Arctic states, whether that could lead to conflict or conflict with the outside world that thinks that those resources should belong to everybody. All of the Arctic states have been very consistent since 2008 in emphasizing that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea provides a framework that everybody will respect regarding who has the rights to these resources. So first of all, I think given that even Russia is very adamant about respecting those rights, I don't see conflict breaking out amongst the Arctic states. As for the rest of the world, I think there's a growing awareness that the law of the sea applies to the Arctic Ocean like it does to every other ocean around the world. So there's a respect for the ownership of resources that fall within national jurisdiction, and those resources that may lay in the central Arctic Ocean, beyond the reach of the different nations in the Arctic, are unlikely to be exploitable. And there's so much uncertainty that if there are going to be any debates about those resources, that's going to lie many decades into the future. And I, for one, hope that by that point in time, as a species, human beings will have gone beyond the point where we're going to be dependent upon energy resources, say at the North Pole, or else I think we're going to have a whole other group of challenges we'll be facing at that point.
So thank you very much, Professor, for helping us to understand all the issues surrounding the Arctic, and also for dismantling or nuancing some of the myths that sometimes media are rising on that issue. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.